Ampifaliana mandrakariva trany no mbola anohizantsika ny fizarana miaraka amin'ny Reverend Dr. Pence amin'izao fankalazantsika ny fetin'ny iray izao. Raha tsy haivo kely ny interview voalohany niarahantsika taminazy dia ny tantaran'ny fiainany manokana tao anatin'ny Fiangonana Loterana Missouri Synode izy. Ny interviewtsika faharoa indray dia niezaka nametraka ny fampitahana sy ny fahasamihafan'ny teolojia tamin'ireo fiangonana loterana samihafa taty Amerika amin'izao fampizarana fahatelo izao dia hiverina aminazy indray atsika satria ny hafaran'ilay interview voalohany dia hoe niala tamin'ny fiangonana Missouri izy hiditra tamina fiangonana loterana anankiray izay tsy Missouri dia nanahoana indray ary ny toy ny tantarany indrindrandrindra nahatongavany ho mpampianatra tamin'ny seminerany fiangonana loterana anankiray izay ianarako aty Amerika amin'izao fotoana izao. Mariko moa zany fa efa misotro ronono izy amin'izao fa isan'ny nampianatra tato zany izy taloha dia izay tantarany izay moa no entina sady mankalaza ny fetin'ny iray no ampahafantarana antsika koa hoe ohatra ny ahoana moa ny zavatra misy sy ny tranga tamin'ny fiangonana loterana taty Amerika araka ny tantarany manokana. So welcome back again, Gary. I always appreciate the time, the sharing, and all of these eye-opening discussion we got from the first two interviews. Let's go back to your history. We did not know yet how did you end up at PLTS as a teacher and now. So the floor is yours.
So while I was at Grandview College, I not only was responsible for the continuing education program of the college, so we put on programs for lay education during the year, but I also was I was in the state of Iowa, and we had a cluster, a group of clergy that were in a Doctor of Ministry program that was offered by the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. So that's one of the seminaries of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. At that time, it was LCA, but anyway. So I became the local professor related to that group of pastors in Iowa. And because of that, I got to understand how a Doctor of Ministry program works and what its value is for the pastors who enroll in it. These are for pastors who've been working for 10 years or more. So then, after I was there for 2 years, PLTS wanted to start a Doctor of Ministry program, and they interviewed 40 candidates for this position, and I was the only one with experience with a Doctor of Ministry program who really understood it and actually believed in it. The others seemed to think that getting to the seminary as director of the Doctor of Ministry program was a way of getting their foot in the door so they could do something else. But anyway, so I got the position, and I came in 1976. And it's interesting to me as I look at that, when I joined the faculty at PLTS, I was the first one to have been hired in about 10 years, and all the faculty were men, and most of them really quite old. Not as old as I am now, but pretty old. So I was the young person on the faculty. And so I ran and managed, I developed and promoted and sold this Doctor of Ministry program. And within a year, we had 100 pastors around the West Coast of the U.S. enrolled in the program. And I would fly around to the different groups. We had 2 groups in Washington. We had a group in Oregon. We had several groups in California. And I would go and meet with them, and we would have the program. So this was a program designed to bring them up to date theologically and give them new tools for understanding how to manage their congregation in effective ways. It was a very interesting, exciting project. But after, I think, 3 years of that program, we lost funding that subsidized the program and discovered we could not any longer sustain it. Also, we didn't have enough faculty really to handle the numbers of students that we had in that doctor of ministry program. So we shut it down, and I became then the director of continuing ed and the academic dean at the seminary. So I taught a number of different things, including church management, and at one time I taught Lutheran Confessions course. I was sort of like, tell me what you want me to teach, and I'll teach it. But I was spending a lot of my time as the dean of the seminary. We got our first female faculty member a couple of years after I arrived there, and she was the only woman on the faculty for several years. She was in ethics, and then we got Jane Stroll, who was a Luther scholar and historian. She was there for a while. She was lovely, wonderful person. And slowly we began to get more women on the faculty. And also, we tried to diversify ethnically and racially during that time, and we're successful in doing so. We had a multicultural program that the seminary sponsored, where students had to, primarily Caucasian students, were required to spend a good period of time in a setting, an ethnically different setting, under a supervisor from that setting. So that was very interesting. Let me just stop there because it's too much.
Yeah. Rehefa nifindra membre n'ilay Lutheran Church in America zany izy niala avy tany amin'izy Ry Synode hozy izy dia tsy hoe nampianatra fotsiny zany nataony tao amin'ilay Lutheran School of Theology tany a Chicago, fa namolavola programa vaovao indray izy dia lasa mpampianatra tao nandritra ny 2 taona zany izy no nampianatra tao namolavola ny antsoina hoe lay education, zany hoe fampianarana teolojia ho an'ny laika zany no isan'ny tena novolavolainy tao. Dia rehefa nampianatra tao anatin'ny 2 taona izy dia nanao antso amin'izay zany lay PLTS, lay ianarako amin'izao Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, lay aty California. Nitady olona zareo ampianatra momba ny lay pastoral ministry zany hoe lay fitondram-piangonana amin'izay. Dia teo amin'olona 700 teo izy no recruter zareo nanao interview zany dia izy no isan'ny anankiray hoe voafidy zany ka lasa mpampianatra tato amin'ny PLTS amin'izay zany izy nanomboka tamin'ny 770. Dia ny 10 taona voalohany nampianarany tato izy dia lehilahy efa nahazoazo taona daholo ny mpiasa sy ny mpampianatra tato, dia izy zany ray amin'ireo hoe mpampianatra mbola tanora tamin'izany fotoana zany izy dia izy no isany namolavola n'ilay programa hoe ahoana ny hamolavolana mpianatra teolojia ho tena mahomby kokoa ny fanaovana asa pastora rehefa any amin'ny fiangonana. Dia zava-baovao zany io tamin'izany fotoana zany nisy grupy anankiroa izy, nisy avy any Washington, avy any Oregon sy avy eto California, zany hoe état 3 samihafa zany no misy an'ilay seminaire niara-niasa taminy namolavolana io fa rehefa taorian'ny 3 taona moa izy dia tapitra rehefa matrina ny tetikasa io dia lasa izy zany no doyen isan'ny doyenne tato amin'ny PLTS zany izy dia nitohizany ny famolavolanan'io programa io. Dia tao anatin'ny fotoanany Asany zany vao nisy vehivavy voalohany nampianatra etika tato amin'ny PLTS dia avy eo amin'izay moa nitombo anankiray nisy vehivavy anay faharoa koa nampianatra momba ny tantaran'ny fiangonana sy ny teolojia loterana dia nandritra ny fotoanany Asany izy dia nitombo tsikelikely teny foana ny vehivavy sy ny mpampianatra sy mpiasa izay tsy voatery Amerikanina fotsy hoditra fotsiny zany satria isan'ny mampiavaka ny PLTS moa zany iray amin'ireo seminaire fito ny ILCA aty États-Unis dia isan'ny tena mametraka n'io resaka diversité io ny PLTS za amin'izao taona 2024 zao amin'ireo mpampianatra sy mpiasa maherin'ny 20 ato amin'ny PLTS anankiroa ihany ny lehilahy fantatro ny encadreurko moa zany ray amin'izy ireo dia izay antsoina hoe recteur zay koa io zany manelanelana ny doyen sy ny université no lehilahy fa na ny doyenne anay koa raha zany amin'izao fotoana zao zay vao nisotro ronono teo iverina mpianatra moa fa mbola tsy nisotro ronono dia vehivavy angatantsika amin'i Jesosy mba ho isany ataontsika interview fa isan'ny tena hoe fivoarana hitany amin'izay zany tao anatin'ireo rehetrarehetra ireo dia niantombo ny vehivavy nampianatra teolojia sy ny asa tato amin'ny seminaire teolojika. Dia avy dia tohizako amin'izay zany ny fanontaniana manaraka hoe nanahoana ny fahitan'ny firosoany vehivavy tsikelikely tao anatin'ny ordinasiona sy fampianarana teolojia teo amin'ny Fiangonana Loterana izay misy azy. So I already said the question in Malagasy. How did you say then? How did you see the development of the women getting involved in the pastoral ministry and the education, theology, teaching theology, not only at PLTS but in the American churches in general?
Well, it was helpful to us during all of this time that I was there, that we were members of a consortium of seminaries called the Graduate Theological Union. When I was there were 3 Catholic seminaries. There was a Presbyterian, a Baptist, a Episcopalian, a United Church of Christ, and also a Buddhist center, a Jewish center, a Greek Orthodox center, and we had cross-registration among the schools. So what that meant was there were women teaching in some of these other seminaries, and our students could take courses with them. So the presence of women teaching theology became natural and normal for us at PLTS, because we also, the faculty at PLTS served on committees with members of these other schools, so that if you were in the New Testament department, you would meet with the New Testament faculty from all the different schools, some of whom were women. So that, I think, helped to change the perspective of PLTS over the years. And slowly, of course, also more women students were beginning to come as it became clear that they were accepted as pastors. That was a slow process. It took many years for women in the ELCA, even though they were allowed to be ordained, they were restricted in congregations that would invite them. Not restricted by rules, but there were only some congregations did not want a woman pastor in those early years, maybe even today. And so often a woman would be an assistant pastor, but not the senior pastor of a large congregation. Now that's begun to change. It's beginning more and more. It takes time, to evolve, but women are being more and more accepted. So now the presiding bishop of the ELCA is a woman. So you see this it doesn't happen overnight. I think it requires enormous patience, and then slowly a cultural change occurs in which people come to accept something that before they thought was not, you could not be. So, for example, now the congregation of which I'm a member has a woman pastor. She's absolutely wonderful. People love her, and our church in Oakland, California, our congregation is thriving, where many of the other congregations are failing so the women in our church are bringing a new kind of life to it that's made a big difference. And now I think at PLTS, most of the faculty are women, and very many, maybe most of the students. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, thank you. I will ask you after my translation, like, how did you accept it in your personal, like, you grew up with male student, male staff, all of this. So how did you accept in your own experience?
Okay.
But I will translate first.
Okay, yeah.
Araka ny lazainy teo zany ny nandraisana sy nanekena ny vehivavy ho pastora sy ho mpampianatra teolojia ary ny isany nampitombo ny vehivavy nianatra teolojia hozy izy tao amin'ny PLTS dia niainga avy tamin'ny fiaraha-miasan'ny PLTS tamin'ireo seminaire teolojika hafa. Ty zany dia hitondrako fanazavana bebe kokoa. Mandrakizao zany ny PLTS dia mbola membre n'ilay antsoina hoe GTU na Graduate Theological Union. Io zany dia karazana consortium anankiray hitambarana seminaire teolojika maro be eto aminay eto Berkeley. Mbola misy hatramin'izao zany io fa efa nisy hatramin'ny fotoanany asany tao tany amin'ny 1770 zay. Misy seminaire katolika anankitelo ao, misy seminaire presbyteriana, batista, episcopaliana, misy an'izay antsoina hoe United Church of Christ zay, misy boudista, jiosy, orthodoxa, zany hoe ny seminaire-ny Fiangonana Kristiana marobe zany no mitambatra ao anatin'ilay GTU dia ny mpianatra rehetrarehetra na zahay ankehitriny ary zany za dia misy fotoana makakoro any amin'ny Jesuit School of Theology zao ohatra, any amin'ny katolika makakoro sasany, any amin'ny afaka makakoro momba ny boudista sy ny jiosy zany na dia mpianatra ato amin'ny seminaire Loterana, afaka makakoro any amin'ny presbyteriana sy ny tariny mbola nisy hatramin'izao dia ireo zany ozy izy no napiditra tsikelikely ny vehivavy tao amin'ny seminaire Loterana koa. Zany hoe ireo vehivavy izay nampianatra tamin'ireo seminaire sasany ireo zany misy mpianatra ao amin'ilay seminaire Loterana mandeha nianatra any dia mahita n'ilay vehivavy mampianatra dia ohatran'izay koa ny mpampianatra hoe samy departementan'ny Testamenta Vaovao zao ohatra ny nisy anazy dia miara-miasa amin'ireo vehivavy mpampianatra Testamenta Vaovao izy dia tonga normal tsikelikely tamin'izareo ilay lehilahy be foana amin'izay zany no manomboka miara-miasa amina vehivavy. Dia nanomboka nitombo tsikelikely amin'izay koa ny vehivavy Loterana nazoto nianatra teolojia satria nianazava taminy amin'izay zany hoe hay ve manaiky tsikelikely koa ny olona ilay teolojiana vehivavy sy pastora vita ordinasiona vehivavy satria namafisiny teo fa mandraka androany aza amin'izao vanim-potoana iainantsika zao dia mbola betsaka ny Fiangonana Loterana mbola tsy resy lahatra hampiasa pastora vehivavy. Dia ny rafitra koa zany amin'ny LCA tsy mitovy amin'ny antsika Fiangonana Loterana Malagasy hoe ny komity no manendry hoe pastora zao tendrena makary dia na tiany fiangonana na tsy tiany dia manaiky, fa ny fanendren'ny LCA zany mangataka ilay fiangonana hoe mangataka pastora hay. Dia mifidy ny sinoda hoe ity kandida anankiray ity na lehilahy na vehivavy mamaly kokoa ny filanareo any. dia anontaniana aloha ilay pastora mety aminao, tena hoe position misokatra ho an'ny rehetrarehetra mihitsy zany io, dia zay rehetra intéressé mamaly an'ilay fangatahana. Dia anontaniana koa ilay fiangonana mety aminareo hoe ty pastora ty, fa tsy hoe rafitra midina ny sinodaly ny ILCA zany dia tena hoe mifamaly ilay resaka miara-manaikina ilay fiangonana na ilay pasteur. Dia mbola vitsy zany mandrakandroany ny fiangonana manaiky hoe pasteur vehivavy no alefa ny synody any aminy, dia rehefa tsy manaiky moa ilay fiangonana mazava ho azy dia mandefa pasteur hafa indray ilay synody fa tsy misy fifanerena. Dia ny zava-nisy tao anatin'ny fotoana maro zany dia raisina ho pastora mpanampy ny akamaroan'ny vehivavy fa tsy tena pastora tompo-toerana raha izay ny azontsika hiantsonana azy. Fa amin'izao fotoana izao dia tena efa nivoatra lavitra be mihitsy ny ILCA, ny filoha nasionaly ohatran'ny hoe président ny ILCA zany hoe ny filohan'ny synoda rehetrarehetra amin'izao efa vehivavy, efa be dia be ny pastora vehivavy filohan'ny synoda partan'ny ILCA, fa tsy niseho hoe indray mandeha fotsiny zany izy, fa nisy fotoana lava be zany tsy maintsy hoe amelana ny olona aloha anaiky tsikelikely hoe ekenay amin'izay ny anana vehivavy pastora sy anana vehivavy mpampianatra teolojia. Dia nazavainy teo koa hoe ny fiangonana misy anazy izy izao fiangonana ILCA anankiray ao Auckland eto akaikinay eto Berkeley eto dia vehivavy zao izy ny pastora mpitondra amin'izareo ao ary isan'ny fiangonana loterana ILCA mbola tena mandroso sy mitombo indrindra aty Amerika io, satria ny akamaroan'ny fiangonana aty Amerika indrindra ny ILCA moa zany dia tena mihena marobe ny mikatona, fa io fiangonana hoentina pastora vehivavy io izy dia tena hoe mbola mitombo ny mpikambana, tena mafy zany izy hoe tena isan'ny mitondra aina vaovao amin'ny fiaina fiangonana izy ny fananana pasteur vehivavy. Dia nanontaniako anazy teo amin'izay zany ho valiany amin'izao hoe nanahoana indray ary nanekenao an'izany hoe hiara-hiasa amina vehivavy sy ny kambana amina pastora hoentina fiangonana misy pastora vehivavy zany raha tamin'ny fiainana manokana.
So you might be interested in my own evolution, thinking about women in ministry. I think when I was a child and a teenager, I never even thought about it. It didn't even occur to me. I just accepted what the world was, which was the only pastor I knew was a male.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't occur to me that there was any problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think probably if it ever were mentioned to me, I would have thought it was strange. I don't think I would have thought it was wrong, but I think I would have thought it was odd or strange.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had no history. I had no experience of a woman as a pastor. When I went to Harvard has a divinity school, and many of the students there were women. The church that I attended, a campus church, had like a deacon or something. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what she was, but she was one of the, I think she was the chaplain at MIT, come to think of it. And she was around, and she was, Connie Parby was her name, and she was a wonderful person. Also, I met there was a Czech theologian, Marianka Fosek, that I knew there. So I suppose, although again, I wasn't thinking about the issue of women in ministry, I'm sure that had an influence on me.
Mm-hmm.
To make me think, well, of course. So let's see, when I left Harvard, I went to the seminary, and of course I was with all men. There were no women on the faculty, a huge faculty.
Mm-hmm.
The only woman was the librarian, and some of the staff people were women. there were a few women in the deaconess program at the Missouri Synod had. They were doing an MA, so they were, and some of them were once in a while in classes with us, but they were second class. And I don't remember reflecting on that very much at the time, to be all honest. I think I just tended to go along with what was.
Mm.
I wasn't against anything, I just wasn't thinking about it. So then, let's see. So then I was in Oxford, and that didn't help. And then I was at Princeton. Somehow, I'm trying to remember the sequence because I'm pretty sure all I know is that when I became a pastor in this small town in Momence, the little group of pastors in the area would hold a little meeting every month. It was just a little cluster of Missouri Synod pastors would meet every month. And each month, one of the members would present a paper on some subject. And I was invited because I was new to deliver a paper. So within a month or two of my arrival at this rural church, basically, I gave a paper in defense of women's ordination. It totally shocked the other pastors and kind of made it organized their thinking about me from ever after, because obviously I was proposing something that was not acceptable in the Missouri Synod. So obviously, whatever changes had occurred, I may not even have been aware of, but I was in favor of women's ordination by that time. So,
yeah, I will translate that very important
okay.
part in Malagasy, but I would like to ask you then to conclude with what will you say to such group of pastors? For example, a group of Malagasy Lutheran pastors who are shocked to hear about someone defending the women ordination. If you can kind of, I don't know, update your paper now and give like a strong message to a group of pastors who are against it. Let me translate to give you also time to formulate your new paper for the Malagasy male pastor against female ordination. If we just want. Araka ny lazainy teo zany tsy dia tena nanana fotoana izy tena nandinika be hoe ahoana marina moa ty resaka ordinasionan'ny vehivavy ty, satria araka ny efa nilazainy moa tao amin'ny Fiangonana Loterana tsy manao ordinasiona vehivavy zany izy dia pastera lehilahy Loterana daholo ny hitany masony teo, dia tsy nandalo tamin'ny sainy akory aza ozy izy hoe misy zavatra tsy normal anie le vehivavy tsy atao ordinasiona dia izy indray ozy izy tsy nieritreritra hoe tsy azo atao no manao ordinasionan'ny vehivavy fa hoe hafahafa aminy fotsiny ozy izy zany ahita pasteur Loterana vehivavy zany. Fa rehefa nandeha nianatra tany a Harvard izy, satria misy fianarana teolojia, misy Divinity School of Theology any Harvard ozy izy dia tany izy no nahita pasteur vehivavy voalohany aumônière sy teolojiana tšeky anankiray ozy izy, samy vehivavy reo dia nanomboka nisokatra amin'izay zany ny masony sy ny sainy rehefa nahitany zareo reo. Dia rehefa niverina avy any Harvard moa izy dia niverina tany Oxford indray mandeha ilay séminaire théologique ny Missouri dia nahita ihany, satria any amin'ny Missouri zany mahazo mianatra teolojia any ny vehivavy fa tsy atao ordinasiona pastora fa mianatra ho diakona. ny diakona zany aty amin'ny fiangonana aty Amerika koa dia tena atao ordinasiona ohatran'ny pastora, tsy hoe ny an'zareo zany tsy hafa le teny ampiasaina hoe ordinasiona sy fanokanana, fa tena hoe samy ordinasiona ny anarany, na pastora na diakonesy. Dia nisy ano izy zany tamin'izy nianatra tany amin'ilay seminairany Missouri, ireo vehivavy mianatra ho diakona reo dia atao ordinasiona ho diakona ry zareo, fa considerena hoe hambany kokoa noho ny Master of Divinity. Ny pasteur zany ilay Master of Art izay nataon'ireo vehivavy ireo. Dia rehefa nieritreritra elaela mihitsy moa izy teo, raha hitanareo somary nijanona kely hoe le izy tany Oxford sy tany Princeton izy tsy dia nisy fiantraikany loatra tamin'ny fieritreretany momba ny vehivavy, fa rehefa pastora tao amin'ny Missouri synode amin'izay izy tao amin'ilay toerana nisy anazy tany Ohio zany, tany Chicago, dia misy fivoriana isam-bolana ozy izy ry zareo samy pasteur lehilahy zany tamin'io fotoana io, dia isaky ny mivory ireo dia manao adi-hevitra teolojika, dia tena hoe mitondra lahateny mihitsy zany ny ray amin'zareo dia miara-mandinika an'iny. Dia tamin'io izy no nitondra lahateny anankiray manohana ny ordinasionan'ny vehivavy dia tena choqué daholo izy ry zareo nitondrany an'ilay lahateny tamin'io fotoana io, dia nanomboka teo angamba izy ny fitadidiany hoe nanomboka nanohana an'ilay resaka ordinasionan'ny vehivavy amin'izay izy. Dia efa napetrako mialoha taminy moa teo ny fanontaniana hoe raha averinao soratana indray ary le lahateninao amin'izao fotoana izao ho ana pastora lehilahy loterana malagasy izay manohatra ny ordinasionan'ny vehivavy ka mety ho choqué ohatran'ireo pastora amerikanina tamin'izany vaninandro zany ireo avereno indray mandeha ary le lahateninao atsarao mba tsy hahachoqué ny lehilahy loterana malagasy izay mbola tsy manaiky ny ordinasionan'ny. So I'm curious to listen to your updated paper.
Well, I've tried to remember how I came to have the views that I did. And I think I'm now remembering that I must have read, while I was at Harvard, I must have read this book by the person that was one of my teachers, The Bible and the Role of Women. Now, this was originally published in 1958 in Swedish as a contribution to the controversy in the Swedish church, the Church of Sweden, the Lutheran Church, over whether women should be ordained. And this was Stendhal's contribution to that discussion, in which he lays out the biblical basis for the acceptance of women's ordination. So I read that. Obviously, it had a big impression on me, and I'm sure I drew on many of his comments when I gave my paper to these clergy. So what would be parts of that? I mean, there are things like this. First of all, for centuries, the church had no women clergy. And partly that was because of a notion that because supposedly the disciples were all men, therefore the leaders of the church should all be men. This was just a notion. But that was powerful and is to this day, I think, in the Roman Catholic Church. So that's a cultural kind of issue. The other are some of these biblical passages, like the one about women should keep silent in the church, that kind of thing. But if you read closely in the Bible, in the New Testament, you see, for example, in the book of Acts, which reflects the earliest development of the church, women seem to have some prominent positions. They're included among the disciples. They're not part of the 12, but they're part of the larger disciple group, and they hosted congregations in their homes, and they were addressed by Paul in some of his letters as significant contributors to the life of the church. So it doesn't seem that they were keeping that silent. So why does some of that appear? It's because as the church aged, from the first century and then into the second century, some of those writings that are the most difficult for us in their attitude toward women are very late writings in the Bible, in the New Testament. They're very late, and they reflect the church becoming more and more influenced by the larger culture. The larger culture was quite anti-woman. Even Aristotle, as a philosopher from 300 years earlier, viewed women very negatively, as many of the Greeks did. And frankly, some of those ideas from the larger Greco-Roman culture found their way into particularly these later writings of the New Testament. So letters, and partly the understanding is, for instance, that the letters to Timothy, Titus, some of the other are not even written by Paul, but by a later generation who identified themselves with the Apostle Paul. So the biblical justification for denying ordination to women is actually much more questionable than people have believed. I'm trying to think if there's anything more. I mean, that's the basic thing. We need to understand these biblical documents within their cultural context to understand why would they say some of the things that they said. And it could be even that some of the disparagement of women was made in order to try to appeal to the cultural attitudes of people they were trying to missionize. So who knows? In other words, the argument against is flimsy.
Yeah.
And also it's what you're used to. A lot of it is not, I think, not even theological. It's just what people get used to. And then it's hard for them to expand their mind to grasp, well, maybe this could work. Maybe that would be good. Let's think new, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I still, I'm convinced that was part of why many churches in Africa also still deny female ordination, because it came with that church tradition that we never updated. Like the Malagasy Lutheran Church, where I belonged, still use the same lectionary, still use the same hymn book, the same teaching the Norwegian and American missionaries brought, like, 200 years ago, when we were a very matriarchal society. But all
a very what society?
Matriarchal.
Uh-huh.
Female had power. We already had women queens in Madagascar before the male missionaries came with the patriarchal Christianity. And then we were used to see these male pastor and male church leaders while their wives took care of their kids at home. So it also brought that change. Yes. And we do not update our theology. We don't consider the Bible and the theology as progressive and changing ideology, but we still maintain as our pride of orthodoxy these 200 years teachings. But yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that.
Let me add in then that it seems to me that the church is still clinging to its colonial past. And instead of either they've forgotten the matriarchal cultural background, or they think they need to reject it if they're to be Christian. But instead, they need to think, okay, what pieces of what we got from the Norwegian missionaries are valuable enough to hold on to, and what things must we challenge out of our own cultural history instead of simply accepting that they somehow knew better than we do about how to organize our society.
Yeah. Well,
You may not want to say all that, but
I could not stop myself with that. That is like the topic of my heart. So I'll try to translate all of this all together to end this
okay.
short interview. Araka ny lazainy zany tamin'ny voalohany rehefa niezaka nitadidy izy Ziza hoe avy aiza moa ireo fototra nahatonga azy nanaiky ny ordinasionan'ny vehivavy ireo dia naseho anazy antsika teo ilay boky hoe The Bible and the Role of Women. Nosoratan'ny mpampianatra anankiray izay nampianatra andreo tany Harvard University izy tany amin'ny taona 1770 io izy no isan'ny lahateny sy boky izay tena hoe tany amin'ny fiangonana tany Suède moa zany io soratana dia roa taona taorianany io moa dia nanaiky ny ordinasionan'ny vehivavy ny fiangonana tany Suède iny zany izy no isan'ny hoe nanomboany naneken'ny ordinasionan'ny vehivavy izy raha ny fitadidiny fa tsy azo adinoina koa nefa izy fa tao anatin'ny taonjato maro ny Fiangonana Kristiana dia tsy mba nisy vehivavy pastora na mamera na mompera mpitarika natao ordinasiona zany fa lehilahy daholo foana ny tao dia isan'ny eritreretin'ny fiangonana hoe voasoratra ao amin'ny baiboly sy anohanany an'izay izy dia ilay hoe satria tsy nisy vehivavy ny apôstôly. Dia io anefa izy tsy tena niainga avy tamin'izay koa fa niainga tamin'ny zava-nisy ara-piarahamonina tamin'ny taonjato tany aloha io dia isan'ny namafisina koa izy ireo tenin'ny Paoly hoe ny vehivavy tokony angina dia adinon'ny fiangonana izy ny mijery ao amin'ny Asan'ny Apostoly izay niandohan'ny fiangonana voalohany izy dia tena tsy nangina zany ny vehivavy fa tena nitarika fiangonana ny vehivavy ary betsaka ny vehivavy izay tononon'ny Paoly anarana tsy mba isan'ireo hoe vehivavy natao hoe tsy mpitarika mihitsy ny teo amin'ny fiangonana fa tena izy no nampandroso ny fiangonana tao an-tokantrano. Dia izay zany izy no mahatonga ny hoe ny fangaro tao anatin'ny teolojian'ny fiangonana izy ny fotom-pisainana sy fieritreretana avy any ivelany indrindra teo amin'ny tontolo grika sy romanina indrindra fa ny fieveran'ireo filozofa grika tahaka ny Aristote izay niaina 300 taona talohan'i Jesosy Kristy fa izy zany no tena isan'ny nanambany sy nanapotika indrindra ny toerana sy ny momba ny vehivavy teo amin'ny fiarahamonina. Ary raha jerena tsara izy satria sady nampianatra testamenta vaovao sy grika koa izy tao amin'ny PLTS raha jerena izy ireo soratra voalohany nosoratan'ny Paoly ary tena voamarina hoe tena tsy misy adihevitra fa Paoly no nanoratra anazy dia tsy mba misy resaka hoe mampangina vehivavy zany mihitsiny. Fa ireo soratry ny testamenta vaovao izay voasoratra efa tafara be taty aoriana tahaka andry Timoty sy Titos izy izay tsy voamarina zato isan-jato hoe tena Paoly no nanoratra anazy fa mety nosoratan'olona hafa fa nampitondray ny anaran'ny Paoly fotsiny amin'izay mpikaroka teolojia mahafantatra tsara an'izany no manomboka mampangina ny vehivavy io. Dia noho izany izy dia mila averina adiadiana sy anarana amin'ny konteksta misy azy ny soratra ao amin'ny baiboly fa mifangaro kolotsaina sy zava-nisy ara-piarahamonina reny soratra reny fa tsy hoe teolojia ny latsaka avy any an-danitra fotsiny fa ny fiarahamonina zany no isan'ny namaritra an'ireny teolojia reny. Dia isan'ny zaraiko taminazy teo moa zany satria mbola tsy tafandika teny mihitsy satria isan'ny tena sujet important amiko loatra ty hoe ny tantara sy ny zava-nisy niainan'ny fiangonana tsy tany amin'ny taonjato voalohany ihany fa nataty aoriana ara ka mahatonga ny fiangonana afrikanina maro indrindra ny fiangonana loterana malagasy izay nisy teo aloha mbola tsy manaiky ny ordinasionan'ny vehivavy dia ny fahitanan'ireo misionera lehilahy nitondra ny Fiangonana Loterana sy Fiangonana Kristiana tany Madagasikara koa satria efa ny Malagasy anefa isan'ny firenena matriarkaly efa nanana mpanjaka vavy zany, tsy nanambany vehivavy zany fiarahamonina Malagasy zany talohany nahatongavan'ireo vazaha lehilahy nitondra ny fivavahana kristianina ireo. Dia lasa niova zany ilay fomba fijerin'ny Malagasy hoe rehefa pastora zany dia lehilahy misionera satria ny vadin'ireo misionera ireo tsy nitondra fiangonana fa sahirana ny karakara ny zanak'izy ireo tany an-tokantrano. Dia ohatran'ny hoe lehilahy zany no natao hoe ampitarika fiangonana sy azo atao ordinasiona dia mbola mitazona ny teolojia tany amin'ny roanjato taona lasa iny ihany na ny Fiangonana Kristiana Malagasy efa ankehitriny aza. Dia izay moa no namafisiny tamin'ny farany teo hoe mbola mipetraka ao anatin'ny fiangonana koa ilay fanjanahan-tsaina nentin'ny fanjanahan-tany. Dia mila mahay mandinika zany ny Fiangonana Malagasy ankehitriny noho izy hoe inona tamin'ireo zavatra nentin'ny misionera ireo moa no tsara tokony mbola tazomina ary iza amin'izy ireo no efa tokony hoe avaozina sy nilaozan'ny toetrandro. Thank you for your patience. That was a long translation.
Yes. Did you tell me that the church in Norway did not ordain women?
One of the first female students in the Malagasy Lutheran Church said that during the time the teacher at the seminary were Norwegian. That male Norwegian teacher teaches them like women should be quiet in the church. And that same female student, she was actually the first woman to get her PhD in theology in whole Africa. She's a Malagasy woman. Mm-hmm. So according to that, she did not do her preaching exam. Like she said, you told me not to preach, not to talk at church. And the teacher was angry when she did that. And one of the first paper related to female ordination in the Malagasy Lutheran Church also, like those who were against female ordination were the Norwegian male missionaries. And the first one who defended the female ordination in the Malagasy Lutheran Church is a Malagasy male theologian, Reverend Dr. Perry Rasul Ndrai. We still have these two first papers. So it was just normal for Malagasy theologians to accept female ordination. But during that time, when the Norwegian church and Norwegian modern Norwegian Christianity accepted women in Norway, these male theologians who did not agree with their national decision went to Madagascar and teach against it there. So yeah, that is just one of the things I wrote in my master thesis. It is entitled The Lutheran World Federation Gender Justice Policy as a Tool to Reform the Theology about Women in the Malagasy Lutheran Church.
Yeah, I just Googled this. That the Church of Norway began ordaining women in 1961, so that was 1 year after the Swedes.
Yeah.
And there are 25% of the 1,200 clergy members today in 2015 were women, and 4 out of 12 bishops are women in Norway.
And so they are not trying to support female ordination in Madagascar, but they already brought that 10 years later. This female theologian started theology study in Madagascar in 1973, and this male Norwegian teacher teaches against it in Madagascar, while the Norwegian church already ordained women in Norway.
So this is, to me, this is another example of a missionary church being locked and frozen in time when you could say the mother church has evolved. And that's tragic.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you've got the male clergy in Madagascar don't want to give up their prerogatives, their position, do they?
No. Yeah, that is why it was important for me that you, as a male pastor, growing up in such world, to try to communicate and share to them how was your own process. But what is sad in Madagascar is either male pastor or even as female theologians, we don't even argue for it. We just accept the situation as it is. And it's one of the reasons I'm trying to share these stories is kind of open Malagasy theologians' understanding, because I myself never consider it as a problem too before I went and meet female pastor when I was a council member in the Lutheran Road Federation. And I just don't know how to talk about it by myself, since I'm just this young woman, do not have authority to talk about it. That's why it's very important for us
Yes.
to have this interview from a male pastor who have Norwegian ancestor history too, to share your own experience. So, and thank you very much. I really appreciate it.